Thanks, Brooke. President Trump today blaming the press for making him look uncivil, presumably because we quote him and air video of him talking. The lead starts right now. President Trump taking what looks like a victory lap, calling the Russia dossier fake and accusing the Obama administration of a Watergate-like scandal. The president's personal lawyer back on the Hill right now after sources say things got contentious between him and lawmakers. What are things getting contentious about, specifically? Plus, the strongest threat about the deadliest bomb. North Korea telling CNN to take its latest threat to detonate an H-bomb above ground, literally. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper, where we're going to start with the politics lead today. Any moment now, we're expecting President Trump to arrive in Dallas, Texas. After getting a lot off his chest before he departed Washington, he addressed the remarkable 1-2 punch yesterday of two Republican senators who expressed grave concerns about the president's fitness for office. Today, the president said there is, in fact, great Republican unity. He blamed the media for complaints about him, saying that the press has made him out to look uncivil. He suggested the script has been flipped on the Russia dossier, noting things when she said the president made her cry and disrespected her and that he could not remember her husband's name. That, in turn, by the way, led the president today to call his memory, quote, one of the great memories of all time. He also said he was really smart, and he reminded people that he went to an Ivy League school. It was essentially open mic night. CNN's Jeff Delaney joins me now live at the White House. Jeff, for a man who was harshly criticized by two senators from his own party, President Trump seemed to be in a pretty good mood today.
He did, Jake. Open mic night or open mic afternoon with the Marine One in the backdrop there. And this, of course, is one of the reasons the president was in a good mood. He believes that he has been somewhat vindicated, particularly by this Russian dossier, and he was speaking out against the Republicans who spoke out against him yesterday. The question in all of this, though, does it matter to his agenda, which is still stalled in Congress?
We have actually great unity in the Republican Party.
President Trump insisting today the Republican Party is still one big tent, neither burdened nor broken by dissent. One day after receiving a bruising rebuke from two Republican senators, the president used those two words again and again, denying any divisions in the GOP ranks.
There's great unity in the Republican Party.
But that's not how all Republicans see it, after Senators Bob Corker and Jeff Flake delivered an extraordinary scolding of Mr. Trump.
I hope that we've reached a tipping point of some type where we don't continue to normalize by being silent the kind of behavior that we've seen.
Mr. President, I rise today to say enough.
After taking to the Senate floor to denounce the president's behavior as reckless, outrageous, and undignified, Flake said it was time for Republicans to stand up to the White House.
We have challenges in this country that we've got to face, and unless the president is able to work with Congress on these things, then people aren't going to stand and say, you know, we're going to give you more time. At some point, there's a tipping point where we have to move on.
Yet there were few signs today of a tipping point. Most rank-and-file Republicans and party leaders steered clear of joining Flake and Corker's bandwagon, even as the president piled on. The reason Flake and Corker dropped out of the Senate race is very simple. They had zero chance of being elected. Now act so hurt and wounded, the president tweeted. Corker, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, told CNN's Manu Raju that wasn't true.
My numbers in the state were very, very strong, and so that's just not true. But look, please, I don't really care what comes out of the White House. So.
Leaving the White House for a fundraising trip today in Dallas, the president said Senate Republicans rallied around his tax plan while visiting their weekly lunch Tuesday on Capitol Hill.
It was almost a love fest. Maybe it was a love fest, but we get standing ovations. There is great unity.
All presidents, of course, get standing ovations, yet Trump touted his and took no responsibility for a lack of civility.
You know, people don't understand. I went to an Ivy League college. I was a nice student. I did very well. I'm a very intelligent person. The fact is, I really believe, I think the press creates a different image of Donald Trump than the real person.
The president also blasting the Clinton campaign for paying for a now famous dossier, looking into any ties between his campaign and the Russian government.
The whole Russian thing is what it's turned out to be. This was the Democrats coming up with an excuse for losing an election.
So once again, the president trying to dismiss the entire Russia investigation and that dossier as a hoax. But Jake, as you know, months ago, CNN and others have confirmed that major parts of that dossier were in fact accurate. So the reality here, once again, the president trying to have his own reality, trying to suggest that this entire investigation on Capitol Hill and the special prosecutor simply are a hoax. We know those investigations are going forward. The president arriving in Dallas today for a fundraiser, Jake, but he's not selling his tax plan. Once again, almost going through the entire month of October, only making one public appearance to sell that tax plan earlier this month. Not doing it today. He's at a fundraiser. Jake.
Jeff Zeleny at the White House for us. Thanks so much. Let's digest this all with my political panel. The president today saying that there is great unity in the Republican Party. You know, the fact remains that his former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, has declared war on Republican incumbents and is getting primary challengers to them. The president's, of course, had trouble getting his agenda passed, and even if a majority of Republicans have passed, have been in favor of his legislation, it hasn't been enough. It does seem that it might not be destroyed, but it does seem that there are some big divisions.
Well, Republican voters are actually fairly unified. There are divisions within the party over certain issues like immigration, but on something like taxes, most Republican voters are pretty united. On something like the president, most Republican voters like him. They think he's doing a pretty good job. So the party's voters are actually fairly unified. It's what we see here in Washington, where a lot of Republican leaders are at odds with the White House over how you execute on this agenda and things like temperament, things like tone. So it seems like the party leadership in Washington, of course, you're not imagining that. There is a lot of division and acrimony here. But among voters, most Republican voters like the president and want to see him do what it is he wants to do, even if the leaders on the Capitol Hill are unclear what that is. Is
that really the division, Paris? The voters are where they are, but it's actually just some of the Republican leaders, the Flakes and the Corkers and the McCains of the world, that's where the division is.
Look, we've seen this division, or I would call it more of a disconnect, all the way going back to the campaign. The President Trump is always connected with the people, and the one thing he knows about his base and the Republican voters is that he knows what they want to hear and what he needs to deliver. That is tax reform, that's infrastructure, that is doing positive things for the middle class in that tax reform bill. And so the division that you might see is a disconnect between what the people in the Beltway want, the establishment GOP in some instances, or some of the people who are not on Team Trump. But at the end of the day, the American people that are the Republican voters, like you said, are with him, and they support him and his agenda.
Simone?
There's only so much goodwill that Republican voters will continue to put into the bank of Donald Trump. They would like to see substantive legislative wins. And this White House and this Congress has yet to identify substantive legislative wins. The House and now the Senate are on the line for the GOP. And because they have yet to get anything done, yeah, Republican voters are feeling really nice and fuzzy about the president right now. But we're coming up soon on a year of him being in office. A year of Donald Trump in that White House with no legislative wins, no delivered promises to that really great Republican base that's got his back. That spells trouble for the GOP in the Senate and in the House and Donald Trump.
But one thing that I think really perplexes me is the way that the Democrats have responded to something like, say, Jeff Flake's speech yesterday in the Senate. You know, it's a moment where you do have a Republican very prominently breaking with the White House, and it's certainly not the majority of the party, but a very small piece of the Republican Party that looks at the president, is disappointed in him, is wondering, is this a party where I have a home? That's a phrase Jeff Flake used. And instead, the DNC puts out a press release that basically slams Jeff Flake for having been too close to Trump when he was in. But I think that would have been an amazing opportunity for Democrats to go, you know what, Republicans, if you don't like what's going on in your party right now, why don't you come check us out? Why don't you come take a look? And instead, they just slam Jeff Flake, even though he's standing up and he's saying, look, I'm surrendering. This is no longer the party that I can be.
It's all talk and no action.
Trying to take opportunity to bring people over, they alienated.
First of all, I don't think Jeff Flake was jumping ship to the Democratic Party anytime soon, first of all. Secondly, Jeff Flake has voted lock and step with this White House. What he has been is very vocal, but he hasn't put any action. There is no, I'm not patting anybody on the back back and giving them cookies and cupcakes
What's
for quitting.
the legislative
Because that's
thing
what
Jeff
is
Flake should
actually
have done to
happening
counter
here.
the president? This
And
is
so
what I'm
Democrats,
Hold on,
I'm going to tell you, so Democrats did the right thing yesterday. The DNC came out on the right side of this issue, so did the DSCC and the D-Trip. Came out and said, look, I think it's nice that Republicans are now saying that what we have all known for months, but we need to put action behind these words.
I want to ask about something that President Trump said earlier today. He blamed the press for making him seem uncivil, saying that we're painting a picture of him that doesn't exist. We put together a little montage.
Would I approve waterboarding? You bet your ass I'd approve it. You bet your ass. But it's political bull. Do you understand? I would bomb the out of them. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. We have this guy, Lion Ted Cruz. We know Lion Ted. I mean, nobody likes him. I've never seen a guy like this. There's a guy totally disruptive, throwing punches. We're not allowed to punch back anymore. I'd like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you.
Is it possible that he's responsible for some of the impression that he's uncivil, Paris?
Well, I think, in fairness, though, the majority, if not all of those, were taken from the campaign trail. And I think that when you look at him as president, I don't think he has been uncivil. And I think, in fairness, again, to the president and to the White House, those were clips. If you play things in context, which you don't really have time to do, you get a different picture about it. So I think that he is sort of right to say that there is a picture or a narrative that is played about him that I don't think is entirely fair.
I mean, it's true that most of those clips were from the campaign, but if I had done a montage like that of his tweets as president, I could have done a similar thing. I mean, he's done some nasty tweets.
He has done some very nasty tweets, and he's attacked folks from his own party, not to mention Democrats, on Twitter. And so Donald Trump has brought these things upon himself. A lot of his issues are self-inflicted wounds here, and he cannot continue to deflect and blame everyone else. At some point in time, he has to take responsibility. The American people are not stupid. They see the tweets. They see what he says. These are words coming out of Donald Trump's mouth, coming from his Twitter fingers. Stop tweeting if you don't want us talking about it.
I don't think the perception that he's uncivil is hurting him with his own base. For them, this is a feature, not a bug. They like that he punches back. They like that he doesn't sound like a normal politician. So if you're someone that listens to the rhetoric of the Founding Fathers and is very dismayed that you do not hear that sort of talk coming out of the White House, this isn't a very happy moment for you. On the other hand, a lot of voters gravitated to him because he seems uncivil. So it's, he's welcome to say, oh, the media is making me look worse than I am. And frankly, a lot of people, I think, especially Trump supporters, would say that's fair, but they also know that he's not a nice, cuddly guy, and that's part of why they like him.
Yeah, they might like that video. They might like that montage. Everyone stick around. We got lots more to talk about, including a Trump associate on Capitol Hill now, just a day after reportedly intense and contentious meetings with House intelligence investigators involved in the Russia investigation. And that story's next. The live look at President Trump arriving at Dallas Love Field Airport, where he is attending a private closed-door Republican fundraiser. As he arrived, President Trump tweeted about the JFK files being released tomorrow, kind of an auspicious moment to do it as he arrived in Dallas, saying, quote, the long-anticipated release of the JFK files will take place tomorrow. So interesting. The president authorized the release of the government files earlier this month, as was prescribed by previous legislation. But the president still has not made clear if he will allow the full release or block from the public some of the files for national security reasons. But now let's go on to the ongoing investigation into Russian interference in the U.S. election. President Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, met with the House Intelligence Committee again today. That follows a 6-hour hearing yesterday, which members described to CNN as very contentious. This all comes after the Senate Intelligence Committee delayed a highly anticipated public appearance by Mr. Cohen because Cohen ignored its request and issued a statement before the hearing. CNN's Manu Raju is on Capitol Hill for us. Manu, what are you learning about those hearings which were behind closed doors?
Well, some members just not getting as much information as they want. Yesterday's hearing before the House Intelligence Committee, Mr. Cohen's lawyer objected to some lines of questioning that he believed were outside the scope of that investigation, and some members left feeling frustrated, not getting enough information. Others said that it was okay, it went fine, it went as expected. Today, this happened as a staff committee meeting on the Senate side, meeting with Michael Cohen's lawyers. I did speak to Senator Richard Burr, the chairman of the committee, who's not ruling out putting him before a public session in the coming weeks here, Jake.
And where is the investigation headed now? The committee also met with President Trump's former former campaign digital director Brad Parscale, and they're going to have a series of public hearings with executives of companies like Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah, that's right. And those Facebook and Twitter hearings are going to actually occur on November 1st. That's going to be very highly anticipated, a new area of focus for this investigation. But Brad Parscale, the campaign's digital director, Jake, actually said behind closed doors he had no knowledge of the Russian efforts on those social media platforms. He denied having any collusion with Russians as well, Jake.
All right, Manu Raju, thank you so much. Now to more on that dossier of allegations made by Russians about alleged compromising information that they claim to have on the president, a dossier that the president today called fake. A source tells CNN that research for the dossier was paid for in part by Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign as well as the Democratic National Committee. And CNN's Pamela Brown joins me now to go over this story. And Pamela, when CNN first broke the story in January of the fact that the dossier, the contents of it had been briefed by intelligence chiefs to President Obama and President-elect Trump at the time, we reported, quote, that the memos originated as opposition research, first commissioned by anti-Trump Republicans and later by Democrats. Now we know who the Democrats were, the Clinton campaign specifically. Tell us why that's significant.
Well, it's significant because it's the first time that we're learning about this direct connection between the Hillary Clinton campaign and the dossier, with the revelation now that Mark Elias, the attorney for the Hillary Clinton campaign as well as the DNC, paid Fusion GPS for Oppo research on Donald Trump last spring, which then later became the dossier. And you already see Republicans, including President Trump, pouncing on this, saying that the dossier is incredible. This is just another reason why, because it was funded by the Hillary Clinton campaign. As you noted, an anti-Trump Republican initially paid Fusion GPS, but it wasn't until after the Democrats started paying Fusion GPS that it hired Christopher Steele, that British intelligence officer, to begin collecting Oppo research on Donald Trump, which became the dossier. The lawyer says he never received a full version of the dossier during the election and never shopped it around to reporters.
The president today called the allegations in the dossier fake, and certainly some of the more lurid charges in that dossier remain uncorroborated, but some of the details have been proven accurate.
That's right. It has not been fully discredited, as the president has said. In fact, intelligence officials have corroborated some of what has been in the dossier, some of the communications in the dossier, and some of the Russian meddling that's mentioned, including the DNC hacks. And as we know, they found it important enough to brief the president about it back in January. That said, some of the more salacious allegations have not been corroborated to our knowledge. And we should point out that the dossier fueled the investigations on the FBI side as well as on the Hill, and Robert Mueller of the special counsel sent investigators over the summer to speak with Christopher Steele. Clearly, it's something that he was interested in.
Right, and Steele talked to him, although he wouldn't talk to Senate and House Intelligence Committee investigators. Yeah. Tell us about Cambridge Analytica. That's this data company that the Trump campaign used. You have some new reporting on them.
That's right. In fact, sources tell my colleague Dana Bash that the head of Cambridge Analytica, this data firm working for the Trump campaign, actually reached out to Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, during the campaign, asking him about the 33,000 emails that Hillary Clinton had deleted. He sent this email to others, telling them that he had reached out to Assange. Now, on Twitter today, Assange acknowledged this, said it was true, and said that he had rejected that request. So this is really the first this is the closest connection that we can make between the Trump campaign and WikiLeaks. As you know, WikiLeaks released the DNC hacked emails, John Podesta's emails, but it's unclear if anyone ever got a hold of those 33,000 missing emails.
And people in the U.S. intelligence community, although Assange denies it, say that Assange has worked and WikiLeaks have worked with the Russian government.
They believe that they're a propaganda arm of the Russian government.
All right, Pamela Brown, thank you so much. We have lots more to talk about, including one Republican senator who says his peers need to, quote, shut up and do their job. That story next.
The most trusted name in news.
Welcome back. To see President Trump there greeting the crowd at Dallas Love Field. Adoring throngs as the 45th President of the United States checks in on his way to a fundraiser this evening. We're back with our politics lead and my panel. We just told you about reporting from the Washington Post that confirmed by CNN and other outlets that it turns out that the Clinton campaign and the DNC were, they helped hire and pay for the Russian dossier. So I wonder if you think that this is damning. It does seem like now we have the Clinton campaign and the DNC also paying for dirt on Donald Trump, just as we know that Donald Trump Jr. was willing to meet with a Russian lawyer that he was told had dirt on Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, but I think this is a little bit different. So opposition research is a part of a campaign. This is what happens. But opposition research is not going to a foreign entity, i.e. meeting with the Russians, as Donald Trump Jr. did, and trying to get information about their opponent. So this is normal in a campaign. But we should not be concerned of who paid for this research. Or the real question is it true? And there are still real questions surrounding the Trump campaign's involvement in all of this, if they were, in fact, connected to the Russians, what the Russians actually did to meddle in our democratic process. And that's what we should be concerned with here. But I understand folks who don't understand how campaigns work, and they think opposition research is damning when that's just a part of the game.
Paris?
You know, I think this is one of the unfortunate things about politics is that they're forced to do things like this. But what it shows is there are a lot of questions. Why did we find out about this information through the media, not through the Justice Department or through the FBI? Why are we just now finding out that there was a Clinton connection to it or that they paid for it? And so if we want to move forward, we need to just be honest and be transparent. If this is what you're going to do in politics, be honest about it. And at the end of the day, when you're looking at Russia, look, we know the Clinton campaign has put out this narrative that they were running the perfect campaign and they did not do anything in terms of opposition research and negative things and doing all that things. But look, it turns out to be true. So it goes back to the initial problem that people had with Secretary Clinton, and it's about honesty. It's about being trustworthy and saying that they didn't do something that now turns out that they did. And it kind of goes back to President Trump saying, you know what, he was saying all along that they had something to do with this, and now it turns out to be
I just like to note I work for Bernie Sanders. I don't think they ran a clean campaign. I'm just like to be clear.
Do you think voters care about this issue, about the Russian interference in the election, about the dossier, about who paid for the dossier? Is that something, does any of it matter to the American public?
I think the day-to-day does not. I think the broader issue of did a foreign country try to meddle in our elections? Did a foreign country try to influence decision makers in the United States? Is a hostile foreign country trying to create chaos in America? I think that does matter to people. I think it's very upsetting to people. I think particularly for Democrats, but now you've had a lot of folks on the right talking about this Uranium One story. Did Hillary Clinton get influenced by the Russians? It's become a bipartisan thing to talk about Putin's influence in America. So I think broadly, the idea that a hostile foreign country is trying to meddle in the United States is unsettling to people, but I think the day-to-day, here's a news story about who paid for what memo, and here's a new detail that came out, I think a lot of that is kind of lost on most people who are worried about how am I going to pay my bills, what's my tax bill going to look like, things like that. I think they're much more worried about those issues.
And if they do care about getting the truth out about this, they need to be fair. We all need to be fair on how it's reported and covered. So if there is some truth or veracity to the uranium story, like you just mentioned, let's go after it with just as much intensity as it has been on the Trump.
But I also think that that's just been cooked up. This is another attempt
I think President Trump would agree the whole Russia thing is cooked up.
Well, then he should take that up with the intelligence community, because the entirety of our intelligence community is united in saying that the Russians absolutely meddled in our election, and we need to figure out what's going on, which is why Bob Mueller is there right now.
So I want to ask a question about Bob Corker and Jeff Flake came out yesterday very strongly condemning President Trump's behavior, suggesting that he's not fit to be president, almost, I'd say. Senator Ted Cruz was asked today about all this fighting and the senators who are critical. He's on the Mark Davis radio show. Take a listen.
We got a job to do, damn it. And so all of this nonsense, I got nothing to say on it. Everyone shut up and do your job.
Everyone shut up and do your job. That sounds like he's saying that Republican senators shouldn't be critical of President Trump. Am I reading, is that unfair?
If you can't take the heat, get out the kitchen. Senator, these people in the Congress are talking about, oh, it's hard, it's too hard. If we talk about immigration and building a wall, that's a hard thing to do. No, you were voted into office to do the tough job. Do your job. And it's interesting that people are now critical on their way out. I have a lot more respect for somebody like a Senator Rand Paul who says, I disagree with the president on certain things, but I am willing to work with him on certain issues like repealing or replacing Obamacare or tax reform. I'll golf with him. I'll try to have an established relationship, but I am not going to go out with a blaze of glory on my way out and not face the voters in my state. And I'm from Arizona, and I'll tell you that these senators, they know full well what the Republican Party was then and what it is now, because
Trump's party.
No, it's been that way for many, many years, but it was advantageous for them when they could win. And now on the way out, they're critical.
Look,
That's
I'll
a
say
problem.
this. Congress is a co-equal branch of government to the executive branch. So for Senator Ted Cruz, a sitting United States senator, to essentially tell a co-equal branch of government to just shut up and go along with the get along, I believe is inappropriate. It is Congress's job, and I agree with Paris, to stand up to the president where you disagree with him, but I think actions speak louder than words, and a lot of these Republicans are all talk, no action.
And I hope that he votes on tax reform like Senator Flake and
That ain't bad.
All right, Paris, Simone, Krista, thanks so much, one and all. Appreciate it. President Trump just telling reporters that he did not specifically, personally authorize that deadly mission in West Africa that killed 4 Americans. This as we learn more about whether or not the Americans were set up. That story next. And we're back with our world lead. President Trump spoke just moments ago about that deadly ambush in Niger, Africa, in which 4 American soldiers were killed. Mr. Trump was asked whether he personally authorized the mission.
But no, I didn't, not specifically. But I have generals that are great generals. These are great fighters. These are warriors. And I gave them authority to do what's right so that we win.
CNN has learned that the team was trying to gather intelligence on a high-value ISIS terrorist in the area. After stopping at a second location, the American and Nigerian forces came under attack. U.S. officials tell CNN that they suspect local villagers likely tipped off the ISIS terrorists. We've got this story covered from the Pentagon all the way to Africa. We're going to begin with CNN's chief national security correspondent, Jim Sciutto, at the Pentagon. Jim, what do we know about the possibility that these local villagers betrayed the American forces that were there to help them?
Jake, a defense official tells us, in his words, it's very probable that someone or some group of people in that village tipped off ISIS to the presence of U.S. forces there. In fact, from the very early after-action reports from survivors of the ambush, they expressed suspicion that they had been delayed in that village and then tipped off to allow for the ambush to take place. Another indicator is this, that when they did go into that ambush, it was a pretty elaborate setup. There were heavy machine guns, there were RPGs, there were mortars. That requires some time, some setup, presumably some planning, which adds to the sense that they were tipped off to their presence there.
David McKenzie, you're on the ground there in Niamey, Niger, not far from where the attack took place. It's an area that's become, we're told, a hotbed of Islamic terrorist activity. How big a challenge has this been for Nigerian and American forces?
Well, it's a big challenge for the Nigerians, and certainly that's one of the reasons why there are American soldiers on the ground here. Just a few hours from where I'm standing is where that deadly ambush took place, Jake, and that is an area on the border of Mali where you have these very fluid militant groups moving in and out across the borders, engaging in these kind of attacks. So one of the big questions right now, Jake, is whether there was some kind of intelligence failure that sent these American soldiers into harm's way on what was supposed to be a routine mission, which was seen to have not a very high level of threat against these soldiers, and as Jim described, they ended up in a massive firefight.
Jim, what more are you learning about the nature of this mission to gather intelligence on a high-value ISIS terrorist in the region?
These teams go out all the time to survey the scene, often to meet with local leaders, village elders, etc. On this particular trip, they were asked to stop in an encampment where it was believed that a known ISIS leader had been before, not at that moment, but had been before, to see what intelligence they could gather. We've been told explicitly they were not sent on a mission to kill or capture that ISIS leader. He wasn't there, but also this is not the team that would do it. It was not a team either equipped to or backed up with the resources, including air cover, necessary to carry out such a mission.
And David, the head of African Command, U.S. Forces, is calling for more resources in the region?
Well, that's right. In fact, that happened like 6 months ago, Jake. The head of the Africa Command speaking to the Senate Armed Services Committee, saying that they're under-resourced, that many of the missions they want to complete, they couldn't because of that lack of resources. And perhaps critically, saying that they didn't have the recovery, search and recovery missions in-house, that they had to contract that. So did he really raise the alarm bells? But one thing worth pointing out, this mission here by the Americans has been here for a long time, more than 10 years. In fact, CNN was invited here just recently to look at the drone base. This is not some secret mission working in the shadows. It's very much above board and very significant, working out of Niger to mitigate the terror threat in neighboring countries, and it's seen as a key buffer zone towards stopping these relatively small militant groups from expanding and developing a footprint. Jake?
All right, Jim Sciutto at the Pentagon, David McKenzie in Niger. Thank you so much. Joining me now to discuss more about this is Congressman Scott Taylor, Republican of Virginia. He's also a former Navy SEAL who served in Iraq. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. I know you were personally briefed today on this mission, obviously without revealing any classified information. What more can you tell us about what the military thinks happened?
Well, I mean, quite frankly, Jake, thanks for having me. It's good to be with you. There's really not more that we can really tell that's being reported. That's not already being reported. That's out there. I mean, you spoke about just a little bit earlier that there was a high-value target in the area, that the Nigerian forces were there to collect information. They weren't on a capture and kill mission. That they believe that during the patrols that there was a very small chance that they would encounter contact. Now, obviously, that didn't turn out to be the case. You also talked about the villagers. I didn't get briefed on this, but look, I've spent a lot of time in that part of the world, and in those areas with tribal and villages and stuff like that, word travels very quickly. So it's not abnormal to assume or think that perhaps that they may have been tipped off.
What do we know about the ISIS terrorists that the soldiers were trying to gather information about?
Well, when you look at that part of the world, of course, when you look at specifically HUIM, which is, Al-Qaeda there in the Maghreb working through Mali, and you have the Nigerian forces, and there's a UN force there as well, too, that has permission from the Malian government as well. You have trails, some of them ancient trails, quite frankly, that they run supplies, guns, drugs, and other things up through Libya as well, too. So you have terrorist groups there operating, ISIS operating there as well, too, and there is a threat there for sure about them and them running things back and forth to Libya.
Now, you have helped train and advise and assist local forces, both as a soldier in Iraq and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, as a contractor in Yemen. Tell us about how difficult it might be. Sometimes you just don't know if you can trust all of the people that you're trying to help.
Well, there's no question. When you look at, and I spent years in and out of Yemen, you get to know the local tribes, the folks that are the influencers there in the tribe, how they talk to each other, how they do connect, how they interact domestically with the militaries there and vice versa. And, we have superb soldiers there in these ODA groups that understand how to do this on the ground level. And I can tell you that under the authorities that are out there, they were operating within their authorities, of course. Now, sure, there can be a debate, and I've been on your show, I believe, and definitely been on CNN talking about the potential debate for AUMF, the authorization of use of military force, that I think that needs to be debated. I think that Congress sort of has to have some stones to debate this. You're under the third administration that's working off a 16-year-old AUMF. So I think the policies and how we're going about this is up for debate. But that being said, they were certainly within their authorities there.
So we are being told that it seems likely that somebody in the village tipped off the ISIS terrorists about the presence of American troops. It's also even suspected that some people in the village tried to delay the Americans from leaving so that the ISIS terrorists could ambush the U.S. troops. Is there any of that you can confirm, or any of that are suspicions that the military is looking into?
Well, certainly the military is looking into it. There's obviously an investigation as well, too, and I can assure you that there's investigations there, right there on the ground. I can't shed any more light on that, and I'm not privy to any more information on that specific question that you asked me.
You've been on these types of missions before. Take us inside what they're like.
Well, when you look at training and assist or foreign internal defense, I mean, you're building capacity, you're building your partner's military to enable them to be able to do the hard work so that the United States doesn't have to necessarily. So, like I said, what could be up for debate is, should our folks be patrolling on semi-permissible environments, perhaps? That's up for debate, and I think that's a fair assessment and argument that we should talk about. And certainly in Congress, I believe that we should do that. But yes, in these missions, you're making relationships, you're building capacity with these local troops, you're understanding who the players are, not just in the partner forces, but also out about in the villages and the key elders, if you will, in the tribes and stuff like that. And like I said, our men that are there now under the Special Forces and ODA are top-notch. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're very good at their job.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Joe Dunford, said this week that the U.S. has 6,000 troops across 53 countries in Africa. That's almost every country in Africa. It seems like American troops might be taking on way too much there and are severely under-resourced.
Well, you know, your previous guest mentioned the resources there in this part of Africa, of course. And yeah, look, you know, and also about the intelligence. And it's very difficult to get intelligence in some of these ungoverned spaces that are there. And you are relying on your local partners as well to help you out. So and I could see where commanders would want more resources in whatever their jobs are doing. To the question, do we believe that folks are overextended? Like I said, I'm on the record talking about the AUMF, that I think the Congress needs to have a debate on it to figure out our footprint, what we're doing, what we're moving, how we're moving forward, and how that really jives up with the 16-year-old AUMF that we have, with input from the administration, of course. And it's not, I don't see it as a partisan thing, but I see it as a necessity to bring the American people in on this debate via the representatives in Congress.
Yeah, these men and women are willing to be brave enough to go there. Congress should at least be brave enough to have the debate.
We should have the stones to have that debate as well, too, like they do.
Indeed. Congressman Scott Taylor, thanks for your time and, as always, for your service. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jake.
The dire new warning directly from a top North Korean official to CNN, why he says the United States should take Kim Jong-un's above-ground hydrogen bomb threat literally. We're going to go live to Pyongyang next.